around the risk landscape this year, what are the key, sort of issues that you've seen emerging? Obviously, probably top of mind for you is the social cohesion discussion we had, but are there any others that, for you you see as critical?
Probably maybe one that stands out, Mark, is, the entire ESG question. I know that, the social cohesion issue actually is included in that. Yeah. But you probably wouldn't get the question that often, from whatever stakeholders that you actually engage with, in terms of your ESG standpoint and what organizations are actually doing about it back then than what you're getting now. So now it's like a must. It's like, it's to the business community and to the community at large. It's like your ticket and your license to operate, type of thing. So it's actually very interesting, how we have placed a lot of emphasis, as we should, by the way. Yeah. I mean, when you look at where we are from an environmental perspective, especially as South Africa, we are not where we should be, at all. And there isn't seemingly enough that is being done, to actually get us to the level where we actually need to be. So I think ESG is one of those, emerging themes that are actually getting more and more momentum. And this is what you would get from an international landscape perspective. So it's not just a focus only locally, whatever stakeholder you talk to, international and local, they are very interested, and they would want to know the efforts and the interventions that are actually being put in place from an ESG perspective. So I think that is something that we're actually going to have to look out for. I think when you get quite a few, funders, for instance, and I think those that are actually, involved in availing funding, as it were. I think we are aware of this. It's not a narrative, but a move, towards. There's less and less people and stakeholders and institutions that are going to continue to fund coal initiatives. I don't want to say coal-fired power stations. So we're finding ourselves in an environment where funders are willing to forego returns on their capital, or would rather sit with their capital and not earn interest on it, and not make money out of it, rather than utilize that capital towards further destroying the universe, for a lack of a better way, And I think for me, that's actually interesting, because I think I come from we come from an environment where capital is like water, it will actually flow where, so where capital is needed, it will actually, flow. So we therefore are in a very interesting environment where that is no longer the case, so it's like capital is being embedded with ethics, and funders are actually asking difficult questions. So ESG is definitely one that we're going to have to keep our eye on, and we're actually going to have to intensify our efforts, especially from a South African perspective.
So building on, maybe emphasizing a bit of what you shared, and I fully agree with you, is I think that the opportunity for South Africa is, if you think about where the funds are going, I've already seen some organizations, global organizations, investing in recycling in East Africa, for example. So if we're not going to translate the opportunities, then the money's going to go elsewhere. And the risk is, we're going to lose out from the funding for, traditional the traditional areas of business we've been focusing on, even in some of the industrial areas like, the auto sector. What's going to happen to sort of the internal combustion engine? Where do we need to invest in the new technologies because that's where the money's going to come and that's where the potential opportunities are. Maybe just to build a little bit on that, from your experience working with business leaders, what are some of the responses that they are addressing, aside from obviously taking this seriously now, because in the past it was just a nice little side topic. What are some of the responses that you've seen in terms of that broader ESG agenda, in the business leaders that you've engaged with?
Companies don't have a choice but to shape up, so when you're getting the pressure from your stakeholders in terms of answering the ESG question, you have no choice. We can't push back, right? I don't know if we have the means or the latitude to actually push back, because then pushing back means that you should be willing to actually cut out, probably maybe from your value chain, those stakeholders, and for most businesses, that is not an option, so you actually have no choice but to actually look at how, so a lot of businesses are actually paying more attention, on the ESG question, and I think it's brilliant, because I think this is something we have to do, Mark, but then because we are not getting too much internal pressure is coming from elsewhere, so whether we like it or not, as a country, we are actually being forced to actually follow suit and follow the direction in terms of where the world, is going. So I actually find it interesting, and a lot of companies. I remember I was speaking to the CEO of SAPI. They are now questioning, or rather, they are frustrated about the fact that ESG score for them is going to be inherently low because of Eskom. Because then when you calculate that, or when you look at that in context in South Africa, Eskom is actually a big contributor to that, and all of us, by and large, are actually dependent on Eskom. So I see a situation where a lot of companies are actually going to go the self-generation route. It's good that we actually have the license exemption having been lifted now to 100 megawatts, in terms of self-generation. So more and more companies are actually going to look at the self-generation route so that they can therefore, de-risk from Eskom, as it were, because then the implications of having that score low, are actually bigger for them. These are international companies. So I think because we're not self-sufficient as a country, we have no choice but to actually sort of like follow suit. So we don't have the latitude of saying, if they don't like it, they can go away. We actually have to, a lot of us are actually, we have our principals outside of the country. When the CEO of BMW South Africa sits, at their headquarters alongside the CEO of BMW China, I'm sure when they talk about investment allocation, one of the things that they actually have to submit as a business case in terms of why a big part of the investment has to come to South Africa is, they have to answer the ESG question. So the BMW, South Africa CEO is obviously going to, not have a strong business case in as far as that is concerned, or is going to lose out, and the big investment allocation is going to go to the CEO, So it's interesting for me, a lot of companies will tell you, BMW CEO South Africa will tell you that my biggest competitor is not Mercedes-Benz. South Africa, it's actually BMW China, and BMW, whatever, because then that is where I actually lose out. Before I even look at the external competitors, I've got a lot of internal competition that I actually, so that is where we find ourselves, and it's actually quite an interesting phenomenon.
Absolutely. It certainly doesn't sort of reduce the complexity. Just maybe one last question on that vein. Any insights on how it's impacting the political and also the broader public sector landscape? Because obviously, if you look at the EU, they've now formalizing the Green Deal, they're driving regulation. I'm certainly seeing, especially on the ESG front, that government has always been, sort of positioning a number of these agendas, whether it's, DOE, or whether it's, sort of mining or other sort of organs of state. But there's certainly been an increase in momentum. But any perspectives on the role of government and sort of the level of readiness to support this transition as the public sector?
It also, from where I'm sitting, Mark, actually forces government to actually follow suit, to take more seriously, especially from an environmental perspective, this issue. I think if we were to take an example of the position of government right now, on coal, as a source of energy. If you talk to DMRE, if you talk to Gwede Mantashe, he will tell you that, it doesn't make sense that we are actually not going to explore, any coal opportunities because we've got coal in abundance, but the world is moving in a particular direction. I don't know if South Africa actually has the latitude to say that we are not actually going to follow suit. We are an open economy, we are an open market, and we therefore are not only competing with ourselves, but we're actually competing with the rest of the world. So if we think that we can go off on a tangent and do our own different thing, then we're actually going to pay dearly, in as far as probably investment is concerned. So we've obviously just come from COP26, there's a portion of funding that has been made available, but it's very clear that that is green funding, that can only be spent on green projects. So government therefore doesn't have any choice. We need the funding, but the ticket to getting or to utilizing or to accessing the funding is to actually, explore and, explore green opportunities, and utilize this on actually green projects, as it were.
Yes.
So we find ourselves as a country where we are not given a choice. So whatever policy that government may have, in as far as this is concerned, if they want to access the funding, which is what we need, I mean, we are very clear from where we're sitting as a country that we are doing a lot to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, but we need the investment to be able to change our economic trajectory. So if we need the investment, so we therefore are actually going to have to dance to someone else's tune. And the tune, that we're actually getting is the green tune, right? So I don't think we can actually, we don't have a choice. But so policies, therefore, government policy will therefore have to follow suit. So government is actually finding themselves in the same position as well, where they won't have a choice, but to be responsive, to where the world is going and to what a whole lot of players out there actually are saying, as it were.
Absolutely. Great. Okay, changing tack a little bit. In terms of, we spoke about COVID right in the start. So clearly a lot of continuing impacts of the ongoing pandemic. My sort of personal view is that we've all worked very hard this year just to keep up, and the realization that we can't sit, and navel gaze about the pandemic. We have to just keep driving on because we don't have the luxury otherwise. But, any sort of specific insights on how you're seeing, business continue to kind of adapt in the ongoing challenges around the pandemic. Obviously, if you look at the community impact, you've got some quite significant ongoing negative impact in terms of unemployment rates continuing to increase. But what are the 2 or 3 things that you're seeing, most significant in this year versus last year from a ongoing, sort of longer pandemic impact?
Probably maybe the 2 that come to mind would definitely be, I think the need for us to probably maybe accelerate our localization efforts, whatever that means. I think we've seen how vulnerable supply chains, are, during this COVID pandemic, Mark, where, a lot of us had our operations threatened as business because of the fragility of global supply chains, and I think the biggest risk that a lot of countries faced, definitely South Africa as well, is our dependence on imports, with China being very central to this. So you're finding a situation now where there is the conversation around regionalization, if I may call it like that, you know, or greater regional cooperation is actually gaining momentum, you know, as it were. So South Africa and Africa, you know, as a continent, I don't know if we have a choice, but to actually, you know, follow suit, you know, as it were, you know, the same way that actually a lot of economies are currently doing. So I see this pandemic presenting a lot of opportunities, you know, to develop, in our case, a new African continental free trade area. I mean, we are already on that path, you know, as it were. So I think more corridors can definitely be developed, and greater regional cooperation can actually amount, you know, from that. And because South Africa is the biggest contributor to the intra-African trade, you know, in goods, I think this probably maybe better positions us, you know, from accruing the benefits of an integrated continental market, you know, as it were, you know, and I think we actually should be doing a lot from a South African perspective to look at how we can actually fully take advantage of this opportunity and actually utilize it, as it were. So from our side, I think that we can actually intensify our efforts, you know, in terms of finalizing the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, as it were, you know. And I think when you speak to certain corners of business, they will tell you that, you know, some of the low-hanging fruit and opportunities we can start working on are actually unlocking trade with the West and East Africa's biggest, you know, economies. And from a West Africa perspective, you know, a lot of people will talk about sea corridors, you know, from Cape Town to Walvis Bay to Lagos to Accra, you know. And from an East Africa perspective, there is rail and road corridors, you know, that can actually be explored, you know, as low-hanging fruit from Joburg to Lusaka to Dar es Salaam to Nairobi, you know. So I guess, you know, those are some of the things that we can definitely start to work on, you know, as a continent. And I guess the second one has to be the adaptation of technology, you know. We obviously, by and large, working in a virtual environment, and we have seen how technology has actually reshaped the working world, you know, as it were, you know. And you've seen a lot of companies, I mean, even churches, you know, adopting new technologies, you know, and ways of working in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, you know, as it were. So I don't know if the world of work is ever going to go back to being the same again. You know, I don't know if it's going to go back to what it was. You know, so it's clear that what is probably going to emerge from here, Mark, is probably going to be some hybrid model as a norm. And the challenge for companies is going to be how they balance the technology adoption and the new ways of working while they maintain a sense of community and meaning. You know, it's also been interesting for me how you have seen the emotional well-being or lack thereof, you know, rising during this time. You know, and I think if we're going to be sitting with employees whose emotional well-being is not what it should be, and a lot of them will tell you because of the isolation. So it's amazing for us, this thing, it's revealing, as much as we are in the comfort of our own homes or the cases, but just from a humane perspective, you know, the need for us to connect is actually, you know, much bigger, you know, than anything. I mean, people are sitting with depression, people are obese, people are, you know, because probably maybe the office space was the one place where it doesn't matter how alone or lonely you are, you come to the office and you know, even if you're going to be alone in the office, but you are in the presence, you know, of other people. So it's amazing for me how that presence of the human factor, you know, and what it does to the human space, you know, as it were. So I think we're probably therefore going to have to balance that, you know, as companies, to say that how do you still give people that that sense of community while you actually run with the technology adoption, you know, and benefit from what the adoption of technology means, as it were.
Yeah. No, excellent, excellent. All right, last, we've got a couple of minutes left, and I guess social unrest we've really talked a lot about, so that's probably, you know, one of the big areas. But any other one that sort of comes to mind for you?
They all resonate, but I'll probably maybe have to go to the first one. Yes. Of South Africa becoming, you know, another failed African state, as I normally put it. And I think my concern, in as far as this is concerned, is the lack of leadership, you know, that exists in South Africa. So I think we might have a lot of things not going right, you know, in South Africa at the moment. We might have a lot of things that we actually have to fix, you know, as a country. But I think our problems are not insurmountable. You know, we just need the right leadership to actually steer the country in the right direction, as it were. You know, so I think our biggest weakest links or weak points, you know, as a country, is that we don't have the right leadership, and especially political leadership. You know, I must say. And you don't have the political leadership that, you know, is willing to make the right decisions, you know, for the country. Mm. You have the political leadership that is more worried about making sure that you don't upset the forces within the ANC, you know, versus making decisions that are actually right, you know, for the country. I really think that we've actually been given a lot of leeway as a country. Moody's tried their very best, you know, to not downgrade us to junk status as a country. But after having raised the same issues over and over again, we got ourselves in a situation on the 26th of March, you know, 2020, where we were downgraded to junk status as a country, precisely because we failed. After these issues being brought, you know, to our attention, we actually failed to decisively deal with the issues. And when you look at why there was a lack of decisiveness, is because we're actually trying to play politics, or we're actually trying to navigate the complexities, you know, that existed within the ANC politics, as it were, you know, and I think that is actually rather unfortunate. So for me, you know, we don't have the right leadership. I mean, you can go to a country, you can be placed in a country where they don't have much going for them, you know, but the country is flourishing because they've got the right leadership, as it were. So we are now losing our, if we have not lost it yet, Mark, we've lost our position as the investment destination, you know, and gateway to the African continent. Not because we are no longer a viable option as South Africa, but because, you know, you don't have the leadership propensity that actually seeks to, you know, utilize these opportunities so that we can be better positioned, you know, as a country. Our environment is not conducive for doing business, and therefore investment ends up going in other parts of the continent rather than coming to South Africa, you know. And when you look at it, I think really the leadership is just not willing to stick their neck out and make decisions that are actually going to change our economic trajectory as a country. So for me, you know, countries rise and fall at the back of leadership, and South Africa is going to fail or fall because of leadership.
Yeah. No, thanks very much. And it's actually a theme that came through last year, but it's actually been emphasized even more this year. And I agree, you know, I'm still I've remained bullish about South Africa. So much potential. We shouldn't write ourselves off, but it's getting to a point now where there's some critical success factors that are going to prevent us from, from realizing that.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for your time. It's, as always, it's amazing, the insights, and appreciate the input. We'll we kind of compiling something by early next year, and we'll certainly share the quotes with you for for your approval, etc. Hopefully, trust that you have a great break, and looking forward to chatting to you again next year.
Thank you so much, Mark. Please keep
Thanks.
well.
You too.
All right then. Thanks. Goodbye.